Taking time this evening to be here. My name is Kai Hushka. I'm part of the group Envisions Spokane that's put forth the Community Bill of Rights twice on the ballot here in Spokane. We're active in collecting signatures to put it on the ballot again. As folks that have been tracking it know that labor and worker rights has been a prime and principal and core element, in essence, of the work. We felt that it was important to find an opportunity to talk about workers' rights, as those that are involved understand that it's not a fight that took place 100 years ago, it's a fight that takes place every day. And unfortunately, for those that aren't in the midst of it, it's hard to see it. And so we thought we'd give it some more visibility, both in the context of the historical as well as the present day, and then tie it into what could be in relation to the Community Bill of Rights. I want to thank all the co-sponsors that helped put this on. Laborers 238, Local 44, of which gave us this facility here today, UFCW 1439, and the Spokane Regional Labor Council are the organizations, along with Envisions Spokane, that are hosting tonight's event. So thank you to all the groups for stepping up and creating this opportunity. One of the things that we did want to highlight was really the historical, to kind of remember what it was like for those that came before us in this fight for justice within the workplace. And believe it or not, for those who haven't tracked things around worker rights, Spokane actually played a pivotal role, not just for our own city, but for the nation. And so I've asked someone who's been a resident historian on this stuff to come and talk about it tonight. And then following his historical talk, to kind of have some of the labor leaders actually come up and talk what it feels like today to do the work. In essence, we're hitting the same sorts of barriers that folks hit in the early 20th century. In essence, free speech rights are restricted, or that employers, in essence, have more free speech rights than the workers. And so that's a structural problem that, unfortunately, organizers have had to find a way to be creative to work around. And that those who've supported the Community Bill of Rights understand that's something that we should not have to work around, but that we need to shatter, and that we need to actually elevate workers' ability to have the right to actually collectively bargain, have free speech rights, rights to assemble, and not have employers actually interfere with that. So again, this fight is a long one, and we thought we'd start basically going back about 100 or so years. We picked tonight because yesterday was actually the 103rd anniversary of the rescinding of the public speaking ban that took place here in Spokane. It actually ushered in some changes to the worker rights conditions that were going on. It was by no means an end point, but it is a point of significance in our own history here locally. So I'm going to stop now and hand the microphone over to Dale Rogest, and who's going to give us some of that history.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dale Rogers. I think I'll just sit down here. It's actually 102 years ago, on March 5th, 1910, that the settlement was reached to basically end the free speech fight in Spokane. It was a settlement that was more of a compromise, actually, than a straight-out victory for either side. The city of Spokane agreed to rescind the ordinance that was in question about prohibiting free speech, but they had indicated that they would replace it with another one that would restrict it to just certain areas, so that you still couldn't speak on the public street in places where there was high traffic in downtown Spokane, for example. You have to restrict it to the parks and that type of thing. Another part of the settlement was that there was about 100 lawsuits filed by the workers who were arrested, totaling $114,000 in damages, which was a lot of money at that time, for their violation of their civil rights. And the IWW, the Industrial Workers in the World, who was leading this fight, said that they would encourage their members to drop those lawsuits, which a lot of them did. I think a lot of them, they couldn't force them to do so, but a lot of them did drop the lawsuits. And with regards to the 400 or 500 people who were arrested, they were actually not arrested for violating the free speech ordinance, because that was held to be unconstitutional early on. They were actually arrested for disturbing the peace. So they used the disturbing the peace ordinance to arrest these people, because the free speech ordinance was declared unconstitutional within the first couple weeks of the entire event. So the city said they were still going to make people serve their time. If they got convicted of disturbing the peace, they still had to serve their 90 days. The arrest records didn't go away. So that was all part of the settlement. The main part of the settlement, however, the significant victory was the rescinding of the licenses of 19 out of 31 employment agencies. So how this whole thing got started was the Industrial Workers of the World was formed in 1905 by primarily socialists and anarchists who got together to form a union to represent the interests of people who were not represented by the other unions that were forming at that time. Principally factory workers in the East and migrant workers in the West. And those migrant workers were, the most difficult people to organize because they moved around from city to city all the time, and they were never in one place for very long, so it was very difficult to organize them. What the employment agencies were doing at that time in Spokane is they were charging $1 to send a man to a job. And those jobs would be sometimes far away, like in northern Oregon for a forestry job or something like that. But they would send 5,000 men for 100 positions, and or 3,000 men for 250 positions over the eastern Washington and northern Idaho and northern Oregon. So by the time the people got there, the jobs were filled, or they would have a revolving system where there would be a man coming, a man going, and a man working, sometimes only for a day or two before they got fired, and then another person would come. They would hire him for a day or two, fire him, and another person would come. As it turns out, these employers were in cahoots with the employment agencies. So they were getting rebates, they were sharing the fees with the employment agencies. So that happened all throughout 1908, and the summer of 1908, mainly the summer because that's when the jobs were primarily available, the forestry jobs and the other jobs. And so the Industrial Workers of the World came in. They came to Missoula in the summer of 1909, and then they came to Spokane and started this free speech fight in November of 1909. And approximately 400 to 500 people were arrested over the course of about 3 months. And they all, most of them got 30 or 60 or 90 days in jail. The jail was filled. They had to commandeer a school, that they filled up the school. They commandeered Fort Wright, and they filled up Fort Wright with other prisoners. And so we have all these prisoners, and doing their time, and more kept coming. And then it was also the scene of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn came to Spokane that time. She was an organizer, and she was a young lady, about 19 at the time, a very dynamic speaker, and she came. She was actually not arrested for speaking. She was arrested for conspiracy, and along with about 4 or 5 other people, and was put on trial in Spokane at that time during that winter. She was found guilty in the district court along with her co-conspirators, and then she appealed it to the Superior Court, and she was found not guilty in the Superior Court, and all the co-conspirators were found guilty. And some people were saying, well, it's because she was 7 months pregnant, and they didn't want to deal with this woman in jail at the time, even though she was 7 months pregnant. So she was found not guilty. But it was a big trial. It was a big civil rights trial in the United States. The other thing that people sometimes forget is that the Bill of Rights didn't apply to states in the beginning. The Bill of Rights says the Congress will make no law respecting, establishing religion and on and on. And at that time, it only applied to federal actions. It didn't apply to the state. The 14th Amendment, with the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause, over time, the Supreme Court eventually said that in order to have due process, in order to have equal protection, you have to have these rights, and therefore these rights now apply to the states. But that didn't happen until 1925 was the beginning of it, and then on from there, by 1960 was pretty much universally applied to the states. But in 1909 and 1910, you had state constitutions that were, Washington State had freedom of speech, freedom of press, and everything in their own state constitution. That's where the rights came from at that time, not from the federal Bill of Rights. So, and that's how this particular law was found to be unconstitutional through applying the state constitution to the law. So they had to go with the disturbing the peace. There's some great pictures from the Spokesman Review and the Chronicle back in the day, and the Spokane Press, which was another newspaper that was publishing at the time. There was actually 8 newspapers being published in Spokane at the time of these events, and 8. There was 8. There were 4 of them were African American papers, weekly papers, and which we don't have any now, right? I don't think we have any. I'm not sure but I don't think we have. But there was actually 4 African American newspapers published at that time in Spokane, and they all lasted 3 or 4 years, and they all died out pretty much before World War I. But there was also 4 daily papers, including the Chronicle and Review were 2 of them, the Press, and one other that I can't remember, but I think it was the Tribune. So there was a lot of coverage of these events, and so for a historian, doing primary research, you go to the sources, and the sources are the newspapers and the handwritten accounts, the accounts by Elizabeth Gurley Flynn and other people like that who wrote. Also, the Industrial Workers of the World newspaper was published from Spokane at the time. This was the home state, the home city of that newspaper. So we had that as well, and there was times during these days when that paper was shut down by the city, raided, and all the issues of the particular issue that was coming out the next day were taken, and they were not allowed to publish. But part of the settlement was that they would be allowed to publish. So that also happened in March, I thought it was March 5th, maybe it was March 4th, but it was either March 4th or 5th of 1910. And I guess it's also noteworthy to note that this settlement was reached by the leadership, by the IWW leadership, and right before the settlement, there was a call that went out to bring men to Spokane to do this all over again. And hundreds came right at the time of the settlement, only to be told that you're no longer needed. So there was a lot of resentment, actually, among the rank and file workers who came to Spokane to participate in this event, only to be told that, well, we reached a settlement, we're no longer going to do this. So it was a leadership decision that was made to settle these issues. There's a couple books. There's a book called Wanted Men to Fill the Jails in Spokane that is written by, I think his name is Duda. I forget his name, but I have a copy of it if anyone wants to look at it. And then I wrote a really short little book called Fanning the Flames of Discontent that is self-published at Amazon that you can buy if you want. 8 questions.
How did IWW become known as the Wobble?
I don't know how it was. I think it was just I mean, IWW is kind of a mouthful, right? And so Wobblies is just, I don't know how it came about, but it was an easier thing to say, I think.
It was one of their catchphrases,
Catchphrases,
like
yeah.
wobble, and then also a big one is letting the cat out of the bag. That was when, because the IWW wasn't about striking, they were about sabotage and to slow down the jobs. So when they were going to do a slowdown, they would say, let's let the cat out of the bag, which is the black cat. And that would, everybody would slow down. And then another one was to wear your wooden shoes. Because when people from Holland, everybody came from those places, they wore wooden shoes. So when they were working in the factories or wherever they were working, they would take their shoes off because it slowed them down. So when they wanted to do a slowdown or, sabotage, they would put on their wooden shoes and that would slow production down. And that was more effective than going out on strike and getting beat up and not getting paid.
As the strikes moved on from city to city, there was a total of 26 of them throughout the West. They became increasingly more violent. And so in other cities after Spokane, you had murders, you had people who were just sort of tar and feathered and killed, and other things happened to IWW organizers in other cities. In Everett, there was a massacre of about a dozen IWW people who were coming in on a boat. Spokane was at the start of it, but as it progressed over the next 4 or 5 years, it became increasingly more violent. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but as to how they became known as the Wobblies, the folklore, the Union folklore was that there was an Asian immigrant, I believe he was Chinese, who couldn't pronounce the word W, who couldn't pronounce the letter, he called it wobble. And so he would say, I wobble wobble, for IWW. From there it grew into wobbles.
Yeah, that's key, yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah. A lot of the workers were also immigrants. Probably 80% of the people arrested were immigrants and were not U.S. citizens. So they used the immigration laws at the time to try to deport people who were participating in these events to, get rid of them. It didn't really work out very well because they didn't really have the cooperation of the federal government in these matters, but they made the threats, at least, that this is what they were going to do, is deport people. Thank you.
Neil, thank you.